Hello everyone, welcome to sqadia.com. Today the topic of my discussion is the integumentary system. This is the final section of the integumentary system which deals with the functions of skin. I hope you have watched the first four sections of this video, which were epidermis, the dermis, the hypodermis, and the epidermal derivatives. What will we be discussing in functions of the skin? Let's take a look. Functions of the skin will be divided into 5 different categories. These categories include the protective function, the sensory function, the thermoregulatory function, the metabolic function, and the sexual signaling. I hope you're excited about this section. Let's take a look on functions of skin. So the functions of skin are divided into 5 broad categories. These categories include the protective function, the sensory function, the thermoregulatory function, the metabolic function, and the sexual signaling. We'll take a look on all these individual functions one by one. So let's take a look on the protective function of skin in a little detail. The skin acts as a physical barrier against thermal and mechanical insults. It is an interface with the outside environment, and due to its composition, it acts as a barrier and prevents the loss of fluids and electrolytes, and also the penetration of any other harmful substance within the body. It contains lymphocytes and antigen-presenting cells for any penetrating microorganisms. If a microorganism tends to penetrate the skin, what happens is an immune response is immediately mounted, and the body knows that a microorganism is trying to invade it. There's a melanin in the skin which was produced by melanocyte. That is right. Melanocyte was present in the epidermal layer of the skin. This melanin pigment, what does it do? It helps to protect the skin against UV radiation. UV radiation may damage the genome of the skin. So what does this melanin do? It forms concentric lamellae around the nucleus of the cell and helps prevent the entry of UV light into the nucleus. The skin also prevents excessive loss or uptake of water. This function of skin is responsible for evolution of terrestrial life, and this function first appeared in reptiles and afterwards in mammals. What happens is skin acts as a barrier and does not allow excess water to leave the body. Neither does it allow water to enter into the body. Thus, it maintains the extracellular, intracellular environment within the body and helps prevent water intoxication or water loss. Skin is also selectively permeable for some lipophilic drugs which can be rubbed into the skin. Since it is selective for materials which can be given via skin, so it's mostly the lipophilic drugs which can penetrate the skin by rubbing, usually involve the steroid ointments. Let's move to the sensory function of the skin. The sensory function of the skin, as we discussed earlier, the sensory receptors is via the sensory receptors. There are 2 types of receptors, primarily mechanoreceptors in the skin. There are capsulated mechanoreceptors and non-capsulated mechanoreceptors. All of these receptors, they're constantly monitoring the environment. The signals are constantly sent to the brain and are being processed. One tends to know it immediately if something touches one's skin. The response is sometimes given immediately by reflex arc, but that is a separate topic for a separate video. Mechanoreceptors are located at different locations within the body, and they help a person to interact with different physical objects in his surroundings. Moving on to the third function of the skin, a very important function, which is thermoregulation. Skin acts as an insulator and maintains a constant body temperature. It promotes heat loss by sweating and increasing blood supply to the dense superficial vasculature. Where was this vasculature found? We discussed it in the dermis section of this video. This vasculature is primarily found in the dermis and in the subcutaneous tissue. There is no blood supply in the epidermis. It is an avascular structure which derives its nutrition from the vasculature of the dermis. Okay, let's take a look on this figure in a little detail. What happens is when there is cold environment, heat is retained by your body. How is the heat retained? Blood flow to the superficial capillaries is decreased. When there is decreased blood flow to the superficial capillaries, superficial subcutaneous capillaries, what happens is there is decreased dissipation of energy, decreased dissipation of heat. Blood circulates to superficial surface of the skin to dispel heat in warm environment. What happens is heat is lost through radiation, and heat is lost through the skin, and the body temperature is lowered down in warm environment. In warm environment, the blood is supplied to the superficial blood capillaries, and they help in this release of heat from the body. Moving on to the metabolic function. Vitamin D3 is synthesized through UV light acting on the vitamin precursor. Another metabolic function of skin is that excess electrolytes can be removed from the skin in the form of sweat. Another very important metabolic function is that subcutaneous layer stores a large amount of fat. This fat depends upon the nutritional status of the person and can be used for energy whenever required, as and when required. The last function of skin is sexual signaling. Skin features like pigmentations and hair are indicator of health in a person and are usually involved in attraction between the sexes. Sex pheromones, as I discussed earlier in the previous section, which was epidermal derivatives, are also important for sexual attraction. Pheromones are produced by apocrine sweat glands, which are epidermal derivatives. Apocrine sweat glands were present in axilla primarily and perineal region. Yes, you're right. And they're responsible for sexual signaling, though this is a vestigial function in human beings, but it is thought to act in some way or the other. So this brings us to the end of this section. In this section, we discussed about various functions of the skin, which included protection, sensory function, thermoregulation, metabolic function, and sexual signaling. This concludes the integumentary system. There were 5 different sections in integumentary system. I hope you have watched all of them. If not, I'll give you a brief outline of what we discussed in various sections. In epidermis, we talked about the epidermal structure, various cells in the epidermis, which were the melanocytes, the dendritic cells, and the tactile cells. The second section was about dermis, in which we discussed about the dermal structure of the dermis, the dermal epidermal junction, and the basement membrane. The third section was about hypodermis, in which we discussed about the hypodermal structure, the vessels, which included blood vessels and lymphatic vessels, and the sensory receptors. The fourth section was about epidermal derivatives. Epidermal derivatives included hair, nail, and glands. Glands included 2 glands, sweat and sebaceous glands. And lastly, that was the function of skin. I hope you found this video helpful. Please keep watching other sections of this video if you have not watched them already. Thank you for watching sqadia.com.